Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is Reverend Sam Trumbore and I serve as minister of this congregation. Before we begin, please check to make sure your microphone is muted. The same for your camera, as images can be potentially distracting. Please also be mindful of your speech while on Zoom, as microphones have a way of getting accidentally unmuted. This will minimize any disruption of our service. Thanks so much for your cooperation. This is now a time of transition from ordinary time to sacred time. Time to check in with your body, to collect your attention, to be present in this moment. Let this moment be separated from yesterday and tomorrow. May this virtual space become a sanctuary for the next hour. Allow your screen to transform into a virtual community hall, to experience images, sounds, and music, songs, poetry, and prose that will lift your heart, broaden your mind, and move you to do justice in the world, in the service of building beloved community. May this virtual service be holy time for each of us that joins us together in the celebration of life. And let us light our chalice with the words that you will see in your order of service on the screen in this case. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Our wisdom tale this morning, May Among the Stars by Rhoda Ahmad, is told by Leah Purcell.
Little May was working on homework one evening. The assignment was about what she wanted to be when she grew up. "What will you tell them, May?" asked her dad. "I will tell them I want to see Earth," said May. "But this Earth is Earth, May," said her mother. "The flowers, the grass, the forests, and the mountains, we live on Earth." "I know," said May, "but I want to see Earth from out there." And she pointed to the sky. "That's an amazing plan, little May," said her father. "Then you'll have to become an astronaut. That way you can see Earth from space." "Astronaut, do you think I could do that?" said May. "Of course you can," said her father. "If you can dream it and believe in it and work hard for it, anything is possible." Well, May asked her mom to take her to the library. And there May searched for books about space and astronauts and got to reading right away. And so after dinner, May made herself an astronaut helmet out of a cardboard box. And then she began to draw pictures of space. When her dad came into the room, May asked, "How do you become an astronaut? It seems impossible." "You will find your way, May." "But space is so far away." "It's closer than you think, May," said her father. "You may get there sooner than you think." And that night, May had a happy dream. She dreamt she was dancing in space, surrounded by billions of sparkling stars, and below her she could see the Earth floating and turning. The next day, in the classroom, the teacher, Miss Bell, told everyone to stand on a line in the rug. "Today we are going to have you share your dreams about the future and what you want to be." Tommy went first and said he wanted to be a firefighter. Linda said she wanted to be a teacher. Fred said he wanted to be a football player. Kathy wanted to be a mother, and May said, I want to go to space and be an astronaut. And then all the kids started laughing. Miss Bell said, Now, May, wouldn't you rather be a nurse? Nursing would be a good profession for someone like you. On the way home from school that day, May was quiet. She looked out the window of the bus. Her world was cold and blue. Nothing was the way it used to be. At home, she ran to her mom crying. Miss Bell said I can't be an astronaut. She said I should be a nurse instead. What a silly thing to say, said her mother. I hope you didn't believe her. Of course I believed her, said May. She's my teacher. Well, I'm sorry Miss Bell didn't encourage you, but she can't stop you. No one can. Follow your dreams, May, and go to space. May started thinking about her dream again. Thank you, Mom, she said. And when I get to space, I will wave to you and Dad from the spaceship. Mom took her hand and they started dancing. Mom said, You must always repeat to yourself, if I can dream it and believe it and work hard for it, anything is possible. May went on dreaming, believing, and working really hard. And guess what? She went to space and waved to her mom and dad on Earth because she became an astronaut. And that's the end of the story. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we know it takes commitment to dream and build a better world and to work on it together.
Unitarian Universalists can be addicted to self-righteousness. I know it well. I love nothing better than to rail against injustice and confront an institution or a power broker or a government official so I can expose them. It feels great to reveal some evil doing without any sense of responsibility or need for personal accountability. They are the bad guys and we are the good guys. This is the easy path to a commitment to justice. The harder path is holding the standard by which I would measure others against myself. How am I doing at living up to my own principles and values? The harder path is where I'll be leading the congregation this morning. You are welcome to join me to measure yourself, if you are willing, in regard to how you are doing with your commitment to justice when it comes to diversity and inclusion. There will be no self-righteousness, I hope. More humility in the hard work of being faithful to our values, principles, and commitments as Unitarian Universalists. I have some readings for you this morning. These are from quotes that I will use to frame the start of the theology. It comes from the theology section of the final report of the UUA Commission on Institutional Change that is titled Widening the Circle of Concern. James Luther Adams wrote, "The faith of the free persons must tangibly make them free in a community of human dignity and equal justice." From the theologian, the Reverend Dr. Paul Razor, liberation theology speaks to the underside of history and offers perspectives on issues such as poverty and oppression that white people might otherwise miss. This is especially important as they respond to social problems. To be in solidarity with those who are oppressed requires empathy and imagination. In the 2018 Service of the Living Tradition at General Assembly, the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt said, "We are on a journey toward redemption. We have lived a year filled with lamentation, with the strength of generations, the failures of the everyday, and the deep down gritty messiness that is the promise of our salvation. There is inherent goodness that exists between us and among us. I want to honor the weary, ragged miracle that is our living tradition." And finally, in the Commission on Appraisal report of 2005, the Reverend Earl Holt said, "Such ambiguity and concomitant tentativeness in articulating what we are about religiously is presently perhaps our greatest liability and the greatest obstacle to Unitarian Universalism achieving the fulfillment of its potential as an empowering and liberating faith for the 21st century. The fear that any such articulation somehow threatens the integrity or right of conscience of any individual is institutionally disabling and must be overcome by mutual trust and a sense of common purpose. The belief that we are joined together in religious association for more than merely instrumental reasons." Here end the readings. Our spoken meditation comes from Erica Hewitt and Rebecca Savage. The Promise and the Practice of Lamentation for two voices, and it'll be read by myself and Michael Hornsby. And I'll begin. The words that you'll hear are from, that Michael will be saying, are from Michael Eric Dyson's book, Tears That We Cannot Stop. Let us turn inward to receive these words. We need one another. This is the core of our Unitarian Universalist theology. We are the human agents of the holy, the vessels through which redemption, healing, salvation occur. There is only us and this short lifetime to create the shimmering, glorious we that might exist. We needed one another before we arrived here this morning. We needed one another before we found our way to this congregation. We have needed one another all along, and we have failed one another. We who are white have failed people of color, and by extension, the shimmering, glorious we that might exist.
One thing you must understand is that whiteness isn't a solo act. It's got a supporting cast. Lots of other things got created to uphold and justify whiteness, and you benefited from them without questioning.
We need one another, but we have not needed one another equally. We contain equal amounts of dignity and worth, but we do not need one another equally. If our need for one another were reciprocal, if our craving for each other's truth and experience were genuine, if we longed for others to feel as deep a sense of belonging as our own belonging, that need would have long ago forced us, my white kin of faith, to surrender our grip on our certainty, our preferences, our standards of comfort.
My dear friends, please try to understand that whiteness is limitless possibility. It is universal and invisible. You swim in its waters, breathe in its air, and take for granted that whiteness is the status quo. That's why many of you are offended by any reference to race. You believe that you believe you are acting and thinking neutrally, objectively, without preference for one group or the next, including your own. You see yourselves as colorless until people of color dump the garbage of race on your heads. And you have no idea how absurd and hurtful that notion is. Yet, we people of color have grown accustomed to your defiance of our pain, struggle, and daily reality.
In our limitless possibility, consciously and unconsciously, we who are white have inflicted wounds on the spirits and psyches of people of color. So much has been lost.
You must not be defensive when you hear our hurt.
We confess before the spirit of wholeness and reconciliation that we have needed to be right and needed to be white more than we needed to listen. We have entrenched our own white obliviousness in our identity as good people. So much has been lost.
You must not be defensive when you hear our hurt.
The gentle mystery in whose heart we're suspended calls us to make room for all people to be their fullest selves, seen, heard, valued, included, empowered. We who are white, we whose hearts are drunk with the wine of our own privilege, have not yet risen to that call. So much has been lost.
You must not be defensive when you hear our hurt.
We need one another in different ways. May we who are white hear the hurt and resolve to do one better than we did before. We need one another now and moving forward. We need one another now we need one another now, though for some, it is too late. This is the call of our Unitarian Universalist theology. We are the human agents of the holy, the vessels through which redemption, healing, and salvation occur.
We need one another. Let us live our calling in the world as lights of redemption and healing together.
Let us take these words and our own thoughts, reflections, and prayers into a time of silent meditation. Every year at the end of June, representatives of the Unitarian Universalist congregations gather for our annual meeting known as General Assembly. Before that, the UU Ministers Association, or the UUMA, has its annual meeting. Before COVID, the ministers started that day with a worship service known as the 2550-year service. It recognizes the ministers who have served for 25 years and those that have served for 50 years. Through election by their peers, one among them is appointed to represent their class and give a talk. It is a great honor to be selected to lift up their classmates' experiences and wisdom. I greatly enjoy this service. Usually, I know many of the people in each class because of the distinguished service that they've offered our congregations and our association. Their words, especially the 50-year speakers, help me understand the changes we've been through over the years and how they have risen to meet the challenges. Ministry in its many aspects is a difficult profession to do well. I'm always listening to hear a pearl of wisdom that I can incorporate into my ministry to serve more effectively. The service is an honoring of the heroics of ministry, as well as both the determination and the humility required to endure and even to thrive. I look forward to it, enjoy it, and celebrate a chance for us to come together as colleagues to honor the common work we do together. I hope this introduction will help you understand my distress. When the leadership of the UUMA decided to eliminate it this year, I was angry and upset. This venerable tradition that has been going on at least since the merger of Unitarians and Universalists felt like a violation of a sacred tradition. Who could be objecting to what I experienced and many of my colleagues experienced as so meaningful? I wrote a long email to the UUMA Executive Director, Melissa Carville-Zemer, asking why they were making this change and expressing my feelings of anger and loss. Melissa emailed me back and invited me to have a conversation. As happens in the process of resistance to change, there is often another side to the story of which I wasn't aware. In my conversation with Melissa, I found out my warm, positive feelings about the service were not universally shared. Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or I'll refer to them as BIPOC, ministers had just the opposite experience. They felt excluded by this proud display of what they experienced as white supremacy culture. Nor did they see themselves as potential 25 or 50-year speakers due to the problems BIPOC ministers have had in settlements in Unitarian Universalist congregations due to endemic white supremacy culture. What they saw was support for the status quo of white supremacy in our ministry rather than challenge or transformation of it. She pointed me to this section of a formal letter of complaint that she received about that service. It says, "We believe that the time has come for a faithful reinvention of our collective approach to the annual 2550 service, particularly in light of our denomination's ongoing commitment to dismantling and reimagining structures that embody barriers to inclusivity and diversity. To that end, we point out that while celebrating longevity of service is one potentially laudable lens from which to appreciate ministerial perspective and wisdom, it is also problematic. Those who hold the longest tenure in Unitarian Universalist ministry tend to disproportionately hold majority cultural identities. It is well established that those who embody identities that are relatively on the margins of UU culture experience greater difficulty in entering and maintaining tenure in Unitarian Universalist ministry. The voices that we need to hear that can help pave the future our movement is moving into might not now or ever reach the 25 years of service or 50 years of service markers. Our point is this: length of service is worth celebrating. Yet, when that is the only lens from which certain colleagues are consistently given a high-profile platform from which to speak year upon year, it represents an institutional codification through a specific traditional service of white supremacy culture. Here ends the letter that I'm going to quote so far. Making a commitment to diversity and inclusion is way, way bigger than I think most Unitarian Universalists realize. It is a direct challenge to the centrality, also known as supremacy, of white culture in our congregations. Today, the white way of doing things is normative. To welcome diversity and inclusion, we have to decenter those norms. One of the ways we can do that is by centering the experience and culture of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And that is often uncomfortable for white folks. But if we are serious about being diverse and inclusive, our congregational culture cannot be white. We must creatively evolve a new diverse and inclusive culture that includes white, but is not white supremacist. This is not a new problem. White UU leaders have been trying to figure out how to do this for a long time. In the 1960s, they tried integration. They welcomed BIPOC folks, but required them to be assimilated into our wonderful white culture. That didn't work. Next, we tried tolerance. We'll be different and celebrate our differences, but the power structure will remain white. Even though we've had a Black UUA president and a Hispanic UUA president, the power structures in Boston have remained predominantly white. That is, until the hiring controversy that precipitated the resignation of UUA President Peter Morales in the spring of 2017. The last few months of his term was filled out by 3 Black co-presidents, the Reverend Bill Sinkford, Leon Spencer, and the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt. They set in motion a process to study systemic racism and white supremacy culture called the UUA Commission on Institutional Change. It gave its final report at General Assembly last June. Our whole association has been digesting this report, some of which you heard a little bit of in my readings. Changing the 25-50-year service is consistent with this report. What is at stake is the harm caused by not changing it. Uprooting white supremacy culture from the inside is quite difficult. In my pleasure and enjoyment of the 2550 service, I, as a cisgender, heterosexual, long-tenured white male minister, am deeply embedded in this culture. It takes a letter like the one I just quoted to get me to begin to question this tradition. One of our other great UU traditions, though, is to question authority. In this case, to question the authority of this service if it is being revealed as a source of harm. How we currently talk about dismantling white supremacy culture is often through using the language of harm. The presence of white supremacy culture is detected by the harm it causes Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There is asymmetry here. The white folks who are happy with the culture aren't feeling that there is any problem. In fact, they may be bothered by BIPOC folks questioning their revered traditions. The ones who are feeling the harm must make the white folks feel uncomfortable enough to pay attention. When you are a marginalized group within a white power structure, this can be a risky business. Those who have the courage to object are likely to pay a price. If you do it often enough, you are likely to be threatened or forced out. This causes BIPOC ministers and leaders to feel compelled to leave Unitarian Universalism on a regular basis. I hope you are sensing the unrecognized gravitas to the cheery, myopic embrace of diversity and inclusivity by most white people. What we are committing to by our commitment to diversity and inclusion is a serious, revolutionary business that can be emotionally painful and disruptive for everybody. It involves taking risks and getting hurt. But that is what a commitment to justice is all about. So when the Reverend Dr. Todd Eckloff self-published and handed out a short book of 3 essays, the Gadfly Papers, at General Assembly 2 years ago, he created quite a backlash in the BIPOC community. Eckloff attacked much of the work done over the previous 2 years to address institutional racism inside the UUA. He also attacked, I go so far as to say libeled, the woman who started the controversy that precipitated President Morales' resignation. Well entrenched in all the privileged arguments, attitudes, and positions of white supremacy culture, Eckloff argued to discredit all these efforts because they were illogical. They didn't meet the test of reason. The effect of his book caused a great deal of harm to many marginalized communities. They condemned the book, as did 500 ministers, yours truly included. This is an active controversy in our movement today, and I don't have time at this point in this service to address it fully, maybe another time. Currently, it exists as an attack on the UUA and UUA board with something that's called the Fifth Principle Project. You might get an email from them that is circulating right now. If you do, I strongly encourage you to look deeper than the surface platitudes they use to bolster their cause against the UUA. As I've looked more deeply into this controversy, and I have dug deep into this controversy, What doesn't get addressed is responding to the expression of harm. Expression of harm. Almost always, there is an unwillingness to address the harm caused by their actions. They want the freedom to say what they want, whether it causes harm or not. In effect, they are saying, if you experience harm from my words, well then, there is something wrong with you. This is quintessential white supremacy behavior. Blame the victim. You're the loser, as Trump loved to dismiss his critics, and I'm a winner. I bring up Trump because he is emblematic of the culture war that now goes under the name cancel culture. That was the theme for the Conservative Political Action Conference in Orlando this year. It is a great magnification of a more civil discomfort within our Unitarian Universalist movement, of an unwillingness to hear and take seriously the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color speaking their truth, seeking to build a more just and equitable UUism. Building something that is going to make white folks at times uncomfortable. One thing I'll give Trump, however, is he understands power, for that is what is at stake here. The argument of harm is the argument of the weak to the powerful to appeal for justice and fairness. It is an appeal to conscience, principles, values, and ideals. Trump has no use for weakness because he has no commitments to values or principles to restrain him. There is nothing else for Trump but power, control, and winning. That is not who Unitarian Universalists aspire to be. We are deeply bound by principles and values and condemn raw expressions of power. Yet, that doesn't mean UUs are insensitive to changes in who has power in our association. And incrementally, the white, cisgender, heterosexual older men are moving out of power in our association, and a more diverse leadership is moving in. It started with the male leadership resignation along with Peter Morales, and has continued under under Susan Frederick Gray, who is deeply committed to anti-racism work. And I'd say we're making good progress. The small group of Eckloff followers don't agree. They see a consolidation of power that feels threatening. Deepening our commitment to becoming a diverse and welcoming religious movement will require significant structural change to dismantle the white supremacy culture that continues to dominate our congregations. Marginalized communities are the ones who can best name the problems many white members do not recognize. That naming process is uncomfortable. Yes. In that discomfort, there could be a signal. There is a risk of danger. Any institutional change has the potential to be self-serving, a self-serving grab for power. No matter who we are all still human and subject to greed, hatred, and delusion. I urge you today, though, to not let this discomfort be a misinterpreted signal. What is being asked in these challenges is to be given the benefit of the doubt, for white folks to doubt their emotional reactivity. When feeling challenged, the better response is to be curious. Investigate, learn more. Don't depend on one voice. Hear it from multiple voices. But most importantly, listen deeply within, beyond one's attachments and aversions, for the ring of truth, independent of emotion. That's what I've done again and again. I've worked through my attachments to the 2550 service. I'm ready to find another way to honor the effort and commitment to ministry among my colleagues. I want all my colleagues to feel fully connected to each other in our congregations, in our traditions, and systematically exclude none. That is what a commitment to justice looks like. So be it.
Good morning. I'm Dick Dana, and I am the service associate for the service today. An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution via one of the options shown on this slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or intent of your gift. We must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next time by visiting albanyuu.org.
Good morning, everybody. When asked to prepare for this stewardship moment, I began thinking about all the things I've learned, the people I've met, and the opportunities I've had in such a short time at the Albany UU. I joined the congregation about 3 years ago, and I can report that the journey inward has been meaningful, eye-opening, and sometimes hard. There's just so many things to learn. Learn about myself, learn about the people around me, and the good works of this congregation. So I wanted to share the way I think about the stewardship moment. There are kind of two sides of my testimonial. One is sublime, and the other is ridiculous. So let me start with the sublime. It's a quote from Viktor Frankl. In between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space is your power and your freedom. Just take a moment to let that sink in. In between the stimulus and the response, there is a space, and in that space is your power and freedom. It makes sense to me. My UU experience is so much about finding my own power and freedom, and now more so about the power and freedom of the whole, that we find as the grassroots. The freedom to support each other and within the evolving landscape of our community and our lives. So that little space, that one that Frankl alludes to, is a really important place to pay attention to. We all have a choice to make, lots of choices really, and responding to the stewardship drive is one of those choices. Now, for the ridiculous part, I love analogies. There's nothing better than a well-placed, ridiculous analogy that helps to bring a message home. But honestly, I'm not sure that this one is going to connect with everybody, so I'd like to ask you to keep an open mind for just a moment. We all are wedges. You know, those wooden triangle things that you see on the floor. We are, each of us, a kind of wedge. And here's the analogy part for me. I think wedges are overlooked. They're almost ubiquitous and invisible at the same time, right? They exist quietly. They are never the center of attention. They always do their job without complaining. And we all know what they do, right? They keep the doors open. But more than that, wedges stay put. Even when they get kicked and scuffed, they stay put. They always do their job. And for this stewardship moment, the analogy for me is real. We wedges keep the opportunities open. Opportunities to stretch our reach, to try new things, and work hard to reach our goals through service, commitment, and in this case, fundraising. So I'll invite you all to fill out your pledge cards and become ridiculous, sublime wedges. Let's all find our power and freedom together and send the wedge part of us to work. Isn't that the real meaning of the stimulus? Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, now is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. There are three ways to share our joy or sorrow. The first option is to type your joy or sorrow in the chat window. Please put the words "read aloud" at the beginning of your message if you'd like us to do that. Please also consider connecting privately in the chat with a pastoral care associate. Today, the pastoral care associates are myself and Phil Rich. Second option is to click the raise hand symbol found either in the participant window or under the reactions button. Our technician will invite you to unmute yourself and speak your joy or sorrow. Third option is to submit a joy or sorrow using our website by noon on Friday prior to the service. We'll begin by reading those that were submitted this past week. Then we'll hear the spoken joys and sorrows, followed by the chat entries that are to be read aloud.
I have one from Michael Hornsby. Michael shares with us that his daughter, Lucia, turned 16 on March 6th. That's the joy. The sorrow is, due to the coronavirus, she couldn't have the sweet 16 birthday party she so richly deserved. And following on, after 2 very successful years at Albany Academy for Girls, Lucia will be off to college next year. She was accepted by Bard College at Simon's Rock in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, for its early college admissions program. Her financial aid package includes 4 competitive scholarship awards. Michael's sorrow is that his baby girl is going away to college 2 years sooner than he thought she would. And moving on. We start with Marty Hotvet. Marty, go ahead, unmute and share.
I want to take a moment to brag about my son Joshua and this congregation. Josh, as many of you know, went through the RE program here. Later, he became a Marine Corps officer. He left the Marines after 12 years to go to business school. so he would have the tools to go into the solar power business. Well, I'm happy to report he has achieved his dream. He is now a manager for Agilitas Energy, a solar power firm in Massachusetts. And Josh just concluded an amazing 2 weeks in which he concluded a deal for 2 utility scale solar projects in New Jersey.
Great. Thanks, Marty. Scanning the list, I don't see any other blue hands raised. Why don't we move on to the chat?
Okay, I'm looking in the chat and actually I don't see any read alouds.
There's one from Elizabeth Valdez, Chuck.
Really? Okay, let me see if I can find it.
If you can't find it, I'm
11:16. It's 11:16.
Okay, go ahead and read it because I
Sorry,
haven't seen it.
11:16.
My sorrow, this is Elizabeth Valdez, says my sorrow is for all the kids who have lost so much during this pandemic year.
Oh, I have one here from Linda Hunt. It says Linda Hunt is getting a new guide dog tomorrow. I think that's it. For the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, let us hold all that we've heard and felt in our hearts.
Elizabeth's read aloud anticipates my prayer of affirmation. So let us turn inward to receive these words. It has been a year now, and there has been so much death and loss. Our hearts ache with the virus victims and their families, and the survivors with chronic health conditions. Our concerns go out to those who have lost jobs, businesses, and resources. Our care goes out to those isolated in their homes at risk of serious complications were they to get the virus. And we're not so happy here either. We haven't sat in community hall. The choir hasn't stood up together and lifted their voices in song. We haven't sung together any of our favorite hymns. No one has moved a stone to acknowledge silently a joy or a sorrow. No coffee, tea, or hot chocolate has been drunk in Channing Hall during coffee hour. I haven't shaken any hands after the service. The building aches with the silence, longing to be filled with the buzz of our voices again. I'm grateful that we've been able to Zoom together, and we will continue to Zoom together. But I long to see your faces in the flesh without masks. I long for us to be able to embrace once more, for the return of dancing, live concerts, theater, and parties. Enough with takeout and grocery delivery. Let us continue to be patient. The vaccines are going into arms. The day is dawning when masks will not be needed anymore. Let us be grateful for the continuity of our congregational community over this year. We have maintained our connections. We have stayed together, and we have stayed calm and carried on. This pandemic will end. Let us hope and pray we will all be there to celebrate. So be it, and amen.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. For closing words, I have two short quotes from Martin Luther King Jr., followed by a quote from Abhijit Naskar, and then back to Martin Luther King. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. And now Abhijit Naskar. It's time to be a hero instead of holding out for one. The good people of history are all gone. MLK, Lincoln, Parks, Tolstoy, Teresa, Madiba, and many more, all are gone. Now it's time for us to be the new good people. We must be the new people with a new vision, a new people with a new perception, a new people with a rejuvenated and determined desire for equality and inclusion, a new people bearing the torch of a new world where religion is the people, where philosophy is the people, where salvation is the people. And now, two more quotes from MLK. When people get caught up with that which is right, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. Our thanks to musicians Colton Parker, Elena Karpoff, ushers Kathy Harris, Tammy Hathaway, Jean Poppy, and Sharon Babila, pastoral care associates Chuck Manning, Phil Rich, welcomer Don Odell, myself, service associate Dick Dana, office support Tammy Hathaway, Elizabeth Baldes, and technical support Chris Jensen.